Social justice means applying the law equally to all people. But in practice, that doesn't always happen. I'm John Gonzalez. I'm here with my law partner, Jack DeRora. We practice law. We seek social justice. On this show, we reveal the conflict between the two.
You know, for a while, it was just us in the office over a cup of coffee talking about the news of the day. With social justice issues dominating our culture, our focus became how do we, as lawyers, make a difference?
And now it's not just us. Today we have Danielle Sydnor, CEO of Rise Together Innovation Institute, to talk about ending poverty. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Jack, you and I have talked a little bit about my health scare about a year ago. And Danielle, I had a heart attack while I was in Arizona and spent 4 days in the hospital. And the bill was outrageous, $160,000. Fortunately, we have insurance, but that didn't cover all of it. And there's still debt associated with that hospital stay. And I think about people that don't have the resources that I have to pay that debt and how they get along with it. And reading through the Rise website, I see that medical debt is a big issue with respect to the issue of poverty. And, you can see how that is.
You know, it's interesting. I've read that medical debt may be the biggest common debt issue for Americans, certainly low-income Americans. And I thought I read some kind of legislation being proposed, some kind of mechanism to keep medical debt out of the credit reports that are issued by the big three credit agencies. So, yeah, this is a big deal.
There's something about eliminating medical debt, Danielle, and how does that work? And I know Rise does a lot of other things, but that caught my eye just because of the bills I got, and they're still coming in from my medical issues. But what is behind the eliminating medical debt, and how does that help poverty?
Well, Gonzo, I'm glad you're still here.
Thank you.
My youngest son had heart surgery at 8 days old, so I understand the $100,000 bill that you get. Fortunately, I was at an employer that covered 100% of his medical care. And so I'm fortunate that he didn't start life with debt attached to him. But medical debt and the medical debt forgiveness kind of efforts that are underway largely are coming from nonprofit organizations that understand that individuals that are hamstrung by medical debt do not go back to the doctor, which means they end up having worse health outcomes. They also get opportunities taken away from them for employment opportunity if it impacts their credit score, it becomes harder to obtain housing. A lot of recent efforts have been put into talking about the social determinants of health, which are all the things outside of actually showing up and being at the doctor. And so someone that does not have access to go back to a doctor because they're burdened by a previous medical debt just end up with worse health outcomes. And so during the pandemic, you saw a lot of organizations coming together and looking at innovative ways to offer government agencies an opportunity to participate in relieving some of this debt from their citizens. Locally, you had the Ohio Hospital Association in collaboration with the City of Columbus and some others that did do some medical debt forgiveness for those individuals in the City of Columbus that met a certain income criteria that also had debt at those hospitals. The last thing I would say is there's a larger effort by an organization, a nonprofit organization, that's basically going around and buying the medical debt from these entities and then forgiving it at pennies on the dollar. And so we just believe that if individuals, and again, there's a study out of California from Kaiser Permanente that demonstrates that once individuals have that debt forgiven, they go back to the doctor. And then that means they live a healthier life and they can contribute to society in the way that we all desire.
Are you saying that right now this medical debt forgiveness is largely a function of nonprofits buying the debt on behalf of the former patient?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different approaches that we've seen. The name of the organization is escaping me at the moment, but they basically have come into communities. They only do it in like larger places where there's economies of scale and you can buy a large amount of debt for a little bit of money. And they partner with that locale. So like the city might be the entity that's helping to purchase the debt. And then they ultimately now own the debt, the nonprofit organization does, and they just forgive it. But we know in any kind of settlement, I started my career in financial services and worked in credit card collections. And when folks would go to the settlement company, I know I got some attorneys on the phone, and maybe the attorneys are the ones that are also doing that debt collection. Ultimately, you buy the debt for pennies on the dollar. And so whatever spread you collect above that is profit to the organization. So knowing that many of these hospitals especially have already written the dollars off as bad debt, they don't intend to really continue collecting on it. These organizations are going in, they're buying the debt, and rather than being the one that collects it, they just forgive it. And so it's a strategy that I think is a way to fill the gap from legislation that really needs to take place to say, why are we continuing to burden Americans with this massive debt, knowing that many hospitals are nonprofit organizations. They're supposed to be doing some portion of free sort of services in order to maintain their nonprofit status. But we see these compounding effects of the debt that people are amassing with no relief in sight.
But aren't you hitting another another speed bump on the road by virtue of now we're seeing new legislation to cut Medicaid?
Yes, we're absolutely seeing another speed bump. And I think that the hard part, Jack, is that many people have a really skewed impression of who is actually the recipient of all of these different government benefits and services. I talk to my team a lot about the power of what we're attempting to do at Rise is kind of change the narrative, shift narratives, and change hearts and minds. In America, and if we look at Franklin County as a microcosm of that, the majority of people experiencing poverty are white. There's over 200,000 people in Franklin County who are in poverty. 47% of those people are white. So when you think about who is actually experiencing the issue the most, the majority of the people that are experiencing are white. Then you have multiracial and all the other kind of groups that make up that pie. But immediately people think about a Black person, an immigrant, when they say Medicaid. And I also say the language that we use, we typically say Black and then low income. When we talk about low income, we're actually talking about poor white people. We just don't say it out loud. And so people often think that they're harming a certain type of person by making these decisions, when in reality, they're impacting folks that look like the majority of the legislators that are actually making the decisions.
One of the things that your organization came out against with Governor DeWine was his idea of having people work for benefits. I'm not sure where that initiative in the governor's office went. Yeah. That's not law now, is it? Is it still in the works?
It's not law now. It was a part of the, especially this next budget. It looks like they're trying to introduce that as a part of the budget reconciliation process. But the welfare to work or Medicaid benefits, there's been a long kind of standing, I think, decision that in order for people to be eligible for health care, they have to have done something to deserve it. And this deservedness issue is one of the things that, again, we try and combat with a narrative, is that all people should have the access to live a healthy life and be able to go to the doctor when something is wrong with them. And that we know we could have a system that covers more people and allows for all of us to live healthy lives. And so the work requirement is likely to just cause it to be more challenging for individuals that are already experiencing financial insecurity to go again, do the things that we know they need to do, like go get a regular checkup, make sure they can pay for their prescription medication. And most of the times, individuals who are single, able-bodied people who are not working are trying to get access to like disability benefits, or maybe they're working gig type jobs where they don't have a consistent job. And then that makes it harder to prove the work requirements that get attached to these types of pieces of legislation.
I have a theory on how we should handle this problem, Gonzo. I don't know if I ever told you. If you're a legislator, and you have medical insurance, which I imagine all the legislators do, you have no right to vote that somebody else should not have medical insurance, be it Medicaid or Medicare.
That'd be a great rule.
You just can't vote people out of the system when you have that benefit.
Well, I find, too, that our conservative friends make things sound very simple and appealing. Like, what's wrong with having somebody get a job and work? It benefits them. It benefits society. But you're right. It just really doesn't work that way in practice. I have to laugh sometimes, Jack, and you've done this, too. So we have Medicaid trusts, right? And the whole idea of that is that somebody with wealth that wants to go on Medicaid can put their wealth into a trust so that it can be passed to their kids. And then after a certain look-back period, they can qualify for Medicaid. They're low income. And we have clients with an awful lot of money that have no problem with that concept. But when they think about Medicaid benefits for actual people in poverty, it's a problem now.
I think it's part of the problem is switching gears a little, Gonzo, and this is something for Danielle to address. Our healthcare system isn't really a healthcare system where we are trying to promote health in the most encompassing way. It's really a fix-it system. And so, legislators aren't thinking, how do we make people healthy? Well, we get them medical care.
Yeah.
And so we reduce the medical problem.
Jack, I'm so glad that you brought this up. So on May the 29th, we have our 4th annual Pivot Summit coming up. And one of the items that we'll be discussing is the benefit of prevention. And, I use very probably basic analogies, and I use them like beating a dead horse because I think once we say it enough times, people get it. But in America, you're not a medical hero if you get me to just eat my fruits and vegetables and exercise and drink my water. If I am severely obese and I code out on the table and you bring back to life, you're now our superhero. And so until we can change, again, the way that we think about this, that if I'm a doctor and I can get you to eat your fruits and vegetables and exercise, and I prevent the very expensive process of a surgery or something like that happening, I don't think we're going to be able to change our healthcare system from fixing the symptom and reacting after the thing has happened versus towards this cost savings effort of prevention.
Let me talk to you about the people we're talking about. And let me start by saying, I can't imagine saying, I can't go to the doctor because I can't afford it. Right. That's just not been part of my world, right? So tell me about the people who you serve. What's it like for them? And what kind of conversations do you have about no preventive care, not being able to go to the doctor? What's that look like?
Jack, one of the fastest growing populations of the people that you're describing are our seniors, individuals who have worked their whole lives and now find themselves on a fixed income and are in a position where maybe they're dually eligible for Medicare and Medicaid, and they're navigating this very complex weaving process of different medical insurance. So what does Medicare qualify me for? What now puts me into Medicaid? Do I have Part A, Part B, J, K, all the other, letters, and then the billboards that I see and the things that I get in the mail. And ultimately what they find themselves with is a situation where they're afraid to go to the doctor for fear that they're going to get a bill that they can't afford, and then that they're going to amass some debt that causes them to lose their home or puts their children's in a financial, bind. We hear that from elders every day, especially with those that are deciding to cut their prescriptions in half to try and stretch out how long the medicine will last. And then we also hear it from individuals, especially, households that are led by single mothers, which is a large percentage now of our community, regardless of, racial ethnicity, that are managing, taking care of themselves, taking care of their kids, are also finding themselves in a situation where the child may be eligible for Medicaid because you have a child. But then sometimes the individual that's working, the mom, is feeling like I might not continue to be able to receive the services that I need. It's just this really fine line where if I start to do a little bit better than I was before, now I lose all of those benefits that I have access to. You might hear people talk about the benefits cliff. Mm-hmm. And so now it's like I want to get promoted at work, but if I do, I lose my medical care. I'm working this job where 7 out of 10 of the most common jobs in Franklin County don't pay enough for a person to take care of an apartment and buy their groceries and necessities. So I'm not going to be able to afford all these things on my own. But then if I stay in this job that doesn't offer me health benefits, it doesn't offer me vacation time, then at least I get to keep these other benefits I have access to. So we're squeezing people into staying in the conditions that they're in rather than finding ways to help them out of it.
Well, when we talk about medical debt, even cancellation of that doesn't solve poverty. But I also saw an interesting thing looking at your organization, and it was guaranteed income. Mm-hmm. That's got to put the fear of God in conservatives, right? Guaranteeing income. Can you explain a little bit about what that concept is?
Yeah, I know it is. So we go through this like mental and verbal gymnastics trying to figure out what is the best way to say this thing without sending everybody running to the hills. So my team is pilot. Go ahead, Jack.
I was going to say, well, hold on for a second. We did have a presidential candidate talk about guaranteed income.
We did. He didn't fare too well in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, that's right.
We think it was helpful. We think it was helpful to add the language to the conversation. But we think about it as an economic mobility investment into individuals. The way that we provide cash-based assistance to people in our community today are through very restrictive, specific types of opportunities. So if you need assistance with your heating and electric bill, there is a stipend or a program for that. If you need assistance with housing, there's a program for that. If you need transportation, there might be discounts for bus fare. So right now, I have to hop through all of these individual hoops to get access to these different benefits. But there's no resources if my washer and dryer breaks down and I have to wear a uniform to work. And in order for me to have a clean uniform, I need a washer and dryer. So what happens is at the end of the month, maybe I have some excess over here because I've been able to navigate managing my food benefits or my childcare benefits, but I don't have any mechanism to just go get my car fixed or to go get my kid enrolled in that extracurricular, program. What we know is based on some research out of California, they did a study for people who had experienced homelessness, and most of them indicated they were $300 to $500 away from being able to stay in whatever housing they were currently in. It is much more expensive for a person to get evicted, to end up in our homeless and shelter system, than it is to provide them with that $300 or $500 that allows them to be stabilized, stay in place, and again, do the things that we know most of us will do, which is take care of their basic necessities.
You have a great sense for what low-income people suffer. Mm-hmm. Do you ever talk to legislators about this? And if you do, what's their response?
Yeah, I have a great sense because I grew up in poverty, and it's not just a thing that I've read about. It's a thing that I've experienced, and even in adulthood, had episodes of poverty. And what I try and convey is that more of us have had an episode of poverty than have not. And if we really think about it like that, whether it's, early in our careers, people who are changing jobs, have a medical situation, the times that I've had an opportunity to talk to elected officials and people who are making policy around this issue, what I have typically received back from them is a bit of like shock and surprise about the expansiveness of the issue. people often think about poverty as the person that you see standing on the street corner, the person that maybe is homeless. And what we are attempting to do is help to broaden our thinking around who is experiencing poverty and why. When we think about the number of people who are in low-wage jobs that don't have medical insurance, that don't have vacation time, don't have paid time off, that don't have retirement plans, we are building a next generation of people that are likely to experience poverty. If I go to work every single day, working 2 or 3 different gig jobs, and I have no retirement, and I don't have medical insurance, and I don't get paid for time off, how am I able to build a financially stable footing that allows me to move forward? And so the biggest thing that I hope to be able to do is kind of remove this ignorance that exists around the actual issue and how big it is.
You know, it just occurred to me, the people that you're talking about, they're actually all around us, but they're invisible. It's the person giving you a hamburger at the fast food place.
That's right.
It's the person who's taking your money at the gas station. It's the custodian. It's interesting, but, you know, they don't wear a sign that says I'm underpaid.
They don't.
But they're all around us.
They don't. And Jack, I would add to that it's the person that's living in that condition today, and then the person that's no longer experiencing poverty. There's not like a badge of honor to raise your hand and say, hey, I had this thing that happened to me this one time, and I got behind and I went into poverty, or I grew up in poverty. And so people don't look at me and assume I've ever experienced poverty, because what do you look like when you've been through poverty? Mm-hmm. And so because we have this impression of it's a dirty, dingy person that's standing on the street corner, people really do have, again, this really big misperception around how big the issue actually is.
One of the initiatives I read about was Ohio's Mothers Trust.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still going on?
That is. So we launched that pilot, which is our first guaranteed income pilot, December of last year, in collaboration with a national organization called Up Together that has been doing cash-based, trust-based cash direct payments to individuals for over 20 years. Started out in Oakland, California, and they're doing work all over the country. And then a local organization, Motherful, that's a collective of single moms that basically believe in mutual aid and kind of coming together and harnessing the resources that they need from within their collective. And so what we have found, we got some early kind of data back. It is a pilot that's going to allow us to collect information and get research on what do people actually do with the resources, because we believe it's important for us to understand how people use them, but then to measure things that sometimes don't feel as tangible, like, did you experience less stress this month? Were you able to take advantage of something that you traditionally didn't have time to take advantage of? And already we have feedback back from one of the moms that they were trying to finish off some certification process, but because of the number of jobs that they were trying to juggle in order to make ends meet, they had been unable to do that. With the extra money that's coming in, they've now been able to let go one of those extra part-time jobs, and they're on their path towards finishing that certificate program. And so what we know is, again, people want to contribute to society. They want to be able to have financial stability. And so that's the first pilot. We have another one that will be launching later this month in collaboration with the Community Shelter Board. And so we're really excited about how we get the data back from this and really tell powerful stories about the impact.
Now, that money comes from private sources then, right?
So it's a combination of private sources and dollars that RISE manages. So Up Together is a private organization, and they do have sources of funding from all over the place. And then a part of our budget that our board approved at Rise Together was about $250,000 for us to set aside to work on testing some guaranteed income pilots. Our goal with this initiative is to be able, again, to have some locally proven outcomes. I mean, we've got communities all over the country that are doing this, that are demonstrating the impact of this. Our national county leaders, as a part of their leadership within NACO, are in relationship with other county executives and administrators and commissioners that are doing this. And so we wanted to do it locally so that way we don't get the feedback that, oh, they can do that in California. It's really easy to do there. Like, well, let's do it here in Franklin County. Let's prove the outcomes, and let's go raise some more money from other people that realize this is a much better way to expend our resources than getting a mom evicted and then paying to get her back into housing.
My impression is that people with a lot of money in this country do give to charities. I mean, Bill Gates and his wife, ex-wife. But you think about our co-president, Elon Musk, spending $25 million on a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin, where that money could go and really do a lot of good. And I have no idea if Elon Musk contributes to charities. I got to imagine he does. But I just think that the political spending in this country is so out of, I don't know, just it makes no sense to me when the same people won't spend
to help people.
To help people, yeah.
Gonzo, I always said it would be interesting if instead of the amount of money that goes into the campaign itself, people had to use the money they brought in to do the things they said they were going to do.
Beautiful.
And then see what happens, Like, so if you bring in $500 million in a campaign, go do all the things that you said you were going to do with that $500 million, and let's see how it works out.
Sure, because a lot of that money sits in those campaign accounts until the next reelection cycle, and it's just getting to be so crazy with the kind of money. But do you see more of a government role if this pilot program really has the the statistics to back it up, that you'll get more money from the government? And I'm thinking of childcare tax credits and how that helps.
Yeah.
But, what else can the government do other than just putting money in the trust?
Yeah, well, I think that the current political environment that we're in, makes it challenging to think about where the government will come in around some of these initiatives. What we hope to be able to prove, though, is that these types of programs actually help people get back to work, stay at work, which is something that I think, both sides of the aisle tend to lean into pretty heavily, is like, how are people contributing to their own economic self-sufficiency? And so if we can draw a correlation between an individual's opportunity to have consistent types of income and their ability to then either get to a better job or better wages, is one of the outcomes that we hope. But the other thing that I would add to that, in terms of where the resources have the potential to come from, is us really having better conversations, I think, with the business community, and understanding that many of the people that are experiencing financial insecurity go to work every day. There is a subset of our population that are experiencing financial insecurity, and you're much more likely to experience it if you're unemployed. I think that all of us understand just basic economics. There's, the income and the expenses, but recognizing that the private sector also has a vested interest, in my opinion, in having a citizenry that has more income and that can procure goods and services and that can contribute and pay taxes. And so if we think about the parties that should be working together to make these types of interventions possible, we hope to prove that with, this pilot.
Let me go back to something I mentioned a minute ago, and it was when I said, what do you say to legislators? But isn't really the fundamental challenge for you and your colleagues one of messaging and defeating what I think is just a bias against low-income people? I mean, you've really got to drive home a message. Yeah. Everything you said is right, but that's like talking Chinese, I think, to most people.
Yeah. No, I mean, the interesting thing about coming into this role, I did a lot of thinking. My background's in finance, and so when you talked about the Medicaid trust, I'm like, yeah, I totally know, because at the time you couldn't have more than $1,200, and so we help people figure out how to have $1,200 and to be able to do the look back and all those types of things. When I think about what was going to be impactful, poverty is not a new problem. It's a choice that we are making specifically in this country, and the way our tax code works and the way some other things, take place. And also recognizing that the issues, that the underlying core issue of systemic racism, and how, because we think that Black people and immigrants and other people of color likely benefit from some of these things, then we take them away from everybody, and that kind of underlying core thing is something that unfortunately we don't talk about enough in terms of kind of connecting the dots. And so I really decided that if I was going to take this role, we had to approach it from a changing the narrative and changing hearts and minds. the mechanics of what we need to do is actually not that complicated. It's very simple if you start to just look at what does it require for someone to be able to live a stable life. As we know, they need housing, we know they need food, we know they need income, they need access to education. But our willingness to do those things is the part that's very complex and it's very hard. And so the reason we approach so much of this with storytelling is, in my experience in working on campaigns throughout the state of Ohio, it really, with the times that I saw success, especially in like a bipartisan way, is when the face of who is experiencing the issue looks like the person that has the power to make the decision. And then also recognizing that being able to connect the issues to what's happening in rural Ohio plus urban Ohio, regardless of gender, regardless of ethnicity and income level, when we can kind of paint this picture that these are big, broad issues that affect so many different people and center the person as a part of our story, we have much better success.
Our current administration is very transactional, I think, in its approach to just about everything. Mm-hmm. But what has always resonated with me is if we give moms $500 a month, they're not running out and buying stocks, right? They're not. They're probably not even putting it into a savings account, but they are buying goods and services, which is a benefit. And I think it's very short-sighted, and I don't think that the current administration is necessarily trying to make things better. But if they were, they're being very short-sighted and not funding programs like this, because people in poverty use their money to buy things that stimulate the economy.
They do.
Yeah.
I mean, again, that's why I said this. The evidence is there. We can say it and scream it to the mountaintops, but being able to have more thoughtful ideas around why, if we know, economists will tell us that the stimulus checks that came out, right? They stimulated the economy. We know what it takes. You put dollars back in the hands of people, the majority of the Americans are going to spend. We have a miserable savings rate compared to many other industrialized nations. So we're not a nation of savers. We're a nation of spenders.
I don't see how we address, at least in my mind, the cost of living as far as buying a house or rentals. That, to me, is another component of poverty, right?
It is.
People can't afford, I think about the house my dad bought when we moved here when I was 6 years old. We lived on the north end.
How much was it?
Beechcroft. I think he bought that house for $60,000. It was right next to Beechcroft High School.
Yeah.
The high school wasn't there at that point. But, just the home prices now are incredible. I'll be shocked if my kids can afford homes.
Yeah.
But how do you address that?
We've commoditized real estate in a way that makes it challenging. And I think myself as a homeowner, we now have to go out to a generation of people and say, hey, I know we sold you on this American dream. And in order for everybody else to get a piece of the pie, we need to keep your values pretty stagnant. So I know you were banking on selling this house and using that nest egg to live in retirement, but you got to take one for the team, and we're going to hold values steady so that way the next generation can get in. Nobody's taking that offer, right?
Well, because to me it's government dictating instead of, two private parties. What this person, if they want to overpay for a house, how are we to say no? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I agree. Even rental. Prices are just sky-rise. But I know there's some initiatives to have affordable housing for people and safe housing. And then it seems to me another part of it is education. Would you agree that the more educated people are, the chances of them getting out of poverty are higher?
Absolutely. I want to say one other thing about just the housing. We're looking at some interesting models of housing around the country. If you look at, especially like in Europe, there is much more government subsidized housing. It's very common. It doesn't have the stigma attached to it that it has here. You have people that actually don't want to own an individual, 3-bedroom home with 2-car garage, but our current zoning laws basically help you only have that option available for the types of housing to buy. And so we do believe that with some of the zoning changes, specifically in the city of Columbus, we urge other parts of our county to be looking at that, to be building different types of housing that make more housing of all types available, which does naturally make housing more affordable. So that's one, I guess, part of that solution. Now, Gonzo, I forgot your other question.
No, but it raises the issue, which I think is unfortunate, that if you have affordable housing in Westerville, Dublin, Worthington, you're going to bring in low-income people to the schools and to the community, and there's just a lot of, adverse reaction to that for whatever reason. And until you address those underlying prejudices, it's really hard to convince city council to change the zoning so that you can have affordable housing right down the street.
Yeah. I think that a part of it is, again, this typecast of who we believe is the person that is in need of affordable housing. When we look at not just the people who are experiencing poverty, but that next band of people that we really call financially insecure. The United Way nationally has this term called ALICE, which is asset limited, income constrained, employed. So these are people who have employment, but they're asset limited and their income is constrained. Those individuals need affordable housing as well. And they're not the people who are in deep, persistent poverty that are looking to navigate. We actually have housing for people who are deeply in poverty. We have solutions for that. Where we are very challenged is by those individuals who don't qualify for some very traditional form of government subsidy. Even if the developer has qualified for the subsidy, the individual may not qualify for the subsidy. And so then when you look at how you build a housing unit for a person that's wages are just constrained, and so they don't make enough to live in the new luxury building that's being built if there are not some units within that building that are also at an affordability level. And I think that if we look at other models, when you do mixed income development, instead of calling it affordable housing, it's mixed income, which means that there may be some units inside of that building that are more financially accessible to someone that doesn't have the $2,000 of disposable income every month. And maybe they only got $200 disposable at the end of the month, but they could afford that to live in that building if you did have some sort of income opportunities available.
Which brings us back to the idea of messaging. I like that. Instead of affordable housing, you use the term mixed income. I want to change the contour of the conversation just a little.
All right.
You said you grew up in poverty.
I did.
And I assume that means you grew up in a low-income area.
So I grew up in Sacramento, California. I moved to Ohio when I was 13. And I often tell people that Sacramento is organized very interestingly compared to, I moved to Cleveland. Sacramento is organized very socioeconomically as opposed to racially. So when I moved to Cleveland, it was where I saw very stark segregation compared to growing up in Sacramento. But yeah, we were in a very working class, neighborhood. But my parents were able to have a Section 8 voucher. That meant that the housing voucher that we had allowed us to live in a variety of different neighborhoods. So my full upbringing was not in a community that was deeply impoverished. We did have some periods of that. But the majority of my childhood, we lived in neighbors around people that look like you guys, look like everybody. And I
feel sorry for those people if they look like us, Gonzo.
Well,
a lot of bald people in the neighborhood.
we had some of those
like
too.
Jack.
No, so you got a full head of hair, so you can't claim to be bald. But what I experienced from that is I didn't realize there was this woman that used to come to our house that probably worked for HUD that did like that annual recertification, and she's a nice lady that used to come to our house every year. I thought everybody had a nice lady that came to their house every year. I didn't know because my parents did a phenomenal job of not allowing us to understand their financial situation, right? And so when I lived in the neighborhood amongst other people, We had friends. We did community together. My parents were entrepreneurs. They owned their own printing company and took care of 6 kids. So that's pretty hard to do, right? But because of having the housing voucher, we lived in a neighborhood where I got quality education. I was bused to schools outside of my neighborhood for a portion of my childhood. And so I did have access to education. That was your question. I did have access to, quality education. And I also had a mother that was an advocate that made sure that I got access to the opportunities I deserved.
See, the reason I ask the question is we're largely a product of our environment. And so if you're in a low-income, low-resource, high-crime area, you need some guiding light, some star that leads you out. You had the benefit of at least a really good environment, and that's apparently what made the difference for you.
It is. I mean, my father struggled with drug addiction for a significant portion of my early childhood. My mother was that consistent stabilizing force. And so there's a program out of like Seattle, Washington, and this guy has this theory of just like the one person rule. If a kid that's experiencing or a person that's experiencing any kind of tragic situation has that one person that they can count on and that counts on them, they are much more likely to have success. And so I absolutely know that I wouldn't have had the outcomes that I did if my mom didn't have that kind of ability to advocate. And her highest level of education was a high school diploma. And so it wasn't because she had this, master's degree and knew how to navigate systems. She took the time to figure out what her children needed and fought to make sure we had access to it.
So address, if you can, then how education can play a role in eliminating poverty.
Well, we've moved to a society, especially, we'll see what happens with the bringing back some of our manufacturing jobs. But even with manufacturing now, it's smart manufacturing, it's clean manufacturing. Having access to education now is the basic prerequisite to have really gainful employment that puts you at a ability to have enough resources to just take care of yourselves. And so if we continue to have a subset of our population that doesn't have access to quality education, we are essentially pushing people into a long-term cycle of likely experiencing poverty. And when I think about what it means to have access to education, it's the chance to explore and to learn new things and to be introduced to concepts that you might not naturally gravitate to yourself. I don't know about you all, but I started out at one point in life, I wanted to be a pediatrician. I wanted to be a judge. I was going to be a graphic designer, all kinds of things. And then I saw Pursuit of Happiness, the story about Chris Gardner. I was like, I'm going to be a financial advisor. And that's what I did. I went into finance and I worked at Merrill Lynch and sold stocks and bonds and had some experiences that my parents never would have probably imagined because they didn't have credit cards when I was growing up. And my first job outside of working for my parents was at a credit card company. And then, they didn't have stocks and bonds and know what 401ks were. But I went and I learned those things and I was able to bring that information back to my community. And so I think it is important that we view education as a vehicle for people to explore things outside of what they're naturally exposed to.
I teach at the at Cap Law School, and I think about my students, and I think about it in comparison to my friends who teach in the high schools around the community. My students are motivated. They want to learn because they can see the light at the end of the tunnel and how what they're being taught is going to directly affect them. Plus, they're paying a lot of money to be there, right?
Yeah.
But I always think about these high school kids that aren't engaged and don't really have that understanding. And so you really have to get to the parents of those children to make sure that they think education is important, because my experience with my own kids is if mom and dad didn't believe it was important, neither did they ultimately.
Yeah.
And I know that RISE tries to work with families, not just making sure there's educational opportunities for the children, but that the families understand how important that is.
Yeah. Gonzo, one of the things that I think about are programs that do or systems that do take care of the whole family. LeBron James has an initiative in Akron, the I Promise School. And what he and his team did was say it's very hard for a kid to come into this environment where maybe things are great at school for the couple hours that I'm here, but then you go back into chaos at home, right? If the family is not stabilized, it's really hard for the individual to succeed. And Jack, you mentioned, being a product of your environment, and I often flip that back the opposite way, that if my dad is a deep sea fisher, I grew up thinking that deep sea fishing is normal. I go out on a boat and we do this thing. If my dad happens to sell drugs, I grew up thinking selling drugs is normal. So if we can think in the affirmative that it's a normal cycle of life to repeat the behaviors that you've seen, it should also be normal, in the more detrimental kind of following of the behavior. But we make it seem like there's a certain subset of population that just wants to do a bad thing. You often gravitate toward the things that you've seen. And so finding ways for us from an education opportunity perspective to empower teachers to have the resources that they need to expose kids and to do it, I would say, in a culturally competent way. That's really important because different things that we all experience in our lives sometimes motivate us differently in an educational setting. You see videos now, especially with more educators being on TikTok and, YouTube and all these things, of doing fun things with their classes, even, in high school. And I'll kind of wrap with this. My oldest son took AP classes all the way through, his high school career. And he was taking AP math. I can't remember which one it was, but I think it was calculus at the time. And he had, his headphones on, he's listening to some music. And his teacher asked him, what he was listening to. And he said whatever, rap song it was at the time. And the next day, the teacher took the time to kind of ask again. It's like, oh, you're listening to so-and-so. He made an attempt to make a connection, right? And so everybody doesn't do that. And so you have a lot of kids that go to school and they're just waiting for the end of the day to come instead of really being excited about being there and willing to participate in the conversation.
I always say that there's no poor students, there's only poor teachers.
Yeah, and I'm sure you probably get some, unfortunate, daggers for that. But I do think that it takes for us to really, it's hard.
It is.
It's very hard, but I think that kids can be motivated. And back to that one person rule is if they can find that person in that school building, sometimes it's not every single teacher they have, but they can find that one teacher, that coach, that, education professional that believes in them, pours into them, they have much better outcomes.
Danielle, thanks for coming in and talking to us. I know Jack and I are humbled by your commitment to our community, and just talking to you and seeing your enthusiasm is really wonderful.
Well, I want to say thank you guys for this platform, for using your voice and your influence to elevate these kinds of concerns into the conversation. If we had more of that, I think we could find solutions together.
You're nice to say that. I have to tell you, I enjoyed the conversation immensely. Thank you so much. Thanks also to WOSU and Dalton Jones. We'll be back in another week or so with another social justice issue. Until then, so long.